Hello, I'm Johannes Zinzendorf, and with me is Zephram DeColby. Together we're going to give you an introduction and a tour of the Heritage Center, so you'll have an idea about what we have to offer in case you would like to visit. It was never our intention to have a museum. Our plan originally was to settle this 63 acres as a spiritual center, a brotherhood of single brothers. And we started to collect local examples of furniture and tools and other arts and crafts of the local Pennsylvania Germans as a way of supplying the needs for the men that we knew would come here. We wanted to have each man have a bed, a chair or two, a table, a chest, a bureau. And so we began buying these things locally. Our valley is quite isolated, and historically it was difficult to get into and out of the valley. So that made the people here very insular. They had to rely upon themselves. They created a close-knit community. And within that community, there were farmers and there were craftspeople. There were weavers, potters, blacksmiths, furniture makers. A variety of different trades and crafts were taken up by many of the people who did not want to farm but wanted to live here and pursue a different type of livelihood. So when we came into the valley, we came into the area not knowing much about the local Pennsylvania German culture. We started to research it and we started to meet people locally. And we would see in their homes that they had examples of local handmade furniture. We would also see these at local farm sales. And so rather than buying modern furniture for our brotherhood, we decided to buy local handmade furniture that provided the sense of beauty and self-reliance that we wanted to nurture here. Our interest in Pennsylvania German antiques and arts and crafts actually began in Bethlehem, where we moved in 1979 from Salt Lake City. Bethlehem was founded by Moravians, and we did not know anything about Moravians either. Turns out they were an early Protestant sect, and when they settled Bethlehem in the early 1740s, they were very self-sufficient as well. And the things they made, the textiles and the ironware, the woodenware, the furniture, went beyond just basic efficiency. They created works of art. So they actually were surrounded on a daily basis by things of beauty, and that really impressed us. In addition to Bethlehem itself, we started to attend folk festivals. We went to museums. And one of the major festivals we attended was the Kutztown Folk Festival. It was founded by a man named Dr. Alfred Shoemaker. Dr. Shoemaker taught at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster. He was the mentor for three men who ended up being very important in working with him to establish three major sources of study and education for Pennsylvania German folklore. They established the Kutztown Folk Festival. They established Pennsylvania Folklife Magazine, and they established the Pennsylvania Folklife Center. With these three key components, Shoemaker, along with his students Don Yoder, J. William Frey, and Walter Boyer, began to preserve and collect the stories, the documentation, and the everyday objects of the Pennsylvania Germans. We found out only much later that Walter Boyer himself came from the Mahantongo Valley and that Don Yoder's grandmother, ironically enough, was born right here on the farm where the Hermitage is now located. So we had these connections that we were not even aware of at the beginning. As we attended the folk festival, we had a chance to meet elderly Pennsylvania Germans, or Pennsylvania Dutch as they often call themselves. People who had lived self-sufficient lives, people who were born in the early part of the 20th century, and who now remembered the activities and trades and crafts, the daily life that they experienced on farms, the making of soap, the butchering, the blacksmithing, the farming with animals, and they were able to come out once a year and demonstrate these activities. We saw a variety of things that we ended up doing ourselves here, such as the making of soap. These days, there are very few crafts left that are still used on a daily basis. Quilt making is perhaps the major one that's still left. Sometimes in our valley you will see some local butchering and the making of apple butter, for example. But for the most part, the self-sufficient daily life of the Pennsylvania Germans as it was lived into the early 20th century is long gone. And it only ended up being shown and demonstrated at places like the Kutztown Folk Festival. So we start the museum tour with the Pennsylvania Dutch Folk Festival room. We have several examples of items from the original folk festival. We have a child's bed, for example. We have a one-row corn planter, and we have several coffins. All of these were things that would have been used and shown in daily life in the early 20th century. The coffins I just were actually display pieces at a local funeral home in the Kutztown area. By the time we saw them, they became objects for curiosity. They became objects to display once or twice a year. They became objects of scholarly study and academic research, and articles, books were written about these, but they had lost their daily place in the everyday lives of people. It's ironic that we would actually come to make a museum because we were always very much against museums. We wanted to recreate an 18th century brotherhood here and live the lifestyle of our early Moravian brothers without running water, without utilities, a very basic, simple life to gain a life in the Spirit and harmony in the Spirit. What we come here. Come on, you want to come over? We have a barn cat here. You want to come over? What do you think? What do you think, huh? This is Sandy. He lives in the barn. He showed up once. His brother's coming in too. You're on camera. You want to say hi, huh? You want to say hi? Or you just want to be held for a while? He has a good winter coat on, ready for the chills and snows of winter, aren't you, huh? We wanted the history to be a living thing, not relegated to dead museums. We wanted to live the life of our brothers, and we did for many years. However, when we decided to change from the idea of a cloistered brotherhood, community of brothers, to a hermitage, we ended up with beautiful examples of tools and furniture that we decided to display. And we decided to show how special the life was, the life of self-reliance, the life of creating beauty that did exist at one time in this valley, and that for us still exists because we still live our lives by creating beauty and creating harmony with the earth. Here in the east balcony of the barn, we have some of the most interesting objects of craft that that I love. Doors. We have lots of Mahantongo doors. There are basically two types of doors. There are doors that are made with panels and a wooden frame that contains the panels. And then there is a batten door. This is a batten door, and basically it's vertical boards with two battens or cross pieces that are nailed to the boards at the top and at the bottom. This is certainly the simplest type of door to make, but it lacks the elegance of the panel doors. So both types of doors can be remarkable works of art, and we have them arranged on the wall so you can actually just turn the doors and see front and back as you go down the row. We also have two complete door casings that we got out of houses before they were demolished. In addition to the doors, we have a variety of tools, iron tools, wooden tools, from the agricultural areas of our valley and from the coal mining areas beyond our valley, where the anthracite coal is mined. One of the most interesting of the mining tools and equipment to me is the bird cage, the canary cage. To find the canary in the coal mine, they use canaries to warn of methane gas. I guess the bird would collapse before the people would, so they would have some warning that there was poison gas in that area of the mine, and they could escape before something dreadful happened, as it sometimes did. Among the iron and steel tools that we have, I find this to be one of the most interesting. We actually got this out of an abandoned house, and it took us years to find out that it had come from the lower end of the valley, where there are limestone quarries. And the quarries were originally dug out by hand, and the pointed end of this tamping rod was used to dig a hole into the limestone, which is actually a soft stone. And then they would place black powder into the hole and blow out that part of the limestone wall. They would then take the limestone to a kiln where they would fire it and burn it. And the burned limestone was then taken throughout the valley as a fertilizer in the springtime for their crops. This is the Hermitage room. The objects here we actually used in our daily lives in the early years of the Hermitage. Our plow is here, the butt saw that we used for sawing wood once we got a tractor with a pulley on it, and behind me, the ox yotes. We plowed with oxen, we trained our oxen, as our early brothers did, and our oxen were named Star and Bright, and we really loved them. It was a love-hate relationship, but more love, I think, than hate. As they were young, we had a training yoke where I trained them how to ha and gee, giddy up and whoa. As they grew larger, we had an intermediate yoke, and finally the big blue yoke was the one that we used for the actual farming. Other items here include the heads of some of our sheep and the skull of our first animal, our beloved Nefertiti goat. And on the wall here with the magnificent horns, this was Charlie. He was the firstborn at Christiansbrunn, and he was dearly loved and sorely missed, and we couldn't let go of him. So we kept his skull. This is the home crafts room. The home was the heart of any farm and was the seat of a great deal of activity, from spinning of thread to the preservation of meat and other food items to making of soap, washing, cleaning. It it was a hotbed of activity. And we have another cat with us now. What is your name, sir? His name is Clown. And Clown loves to be held. So why don't you stay with me and we'll talk about this. All right. So in this room we have a variety of apple peelers, kettles for making apple butter, presses for making apple cider, dairy bottles from a variety of local dairies. They're definitely 20th century. Let's see. There's a kettle for making lard. There are sausage stuffers, lard presses, butter churns, and a variety of things that we can actually pinpoint to specific people. Come on down. Put you down for a second, such as the soap. The soap is from the Weary Kopp farm, and it was made by a woman named Minnie Kopp. We didn't know her, but we knew both of her children, Faye and Lawrence. And Faye told us that her mother was very precise in the making of soap. She boiled it 3 times to make it as light as possible. And she was so compulsive that she actually beveled the edges of her soap. I've seen a lot of soap in my time, homemade soap, but I've never known anyone to actually bevel the edges. So this is actually an interesting piece that we can tie down to a specific farm. The interesting flying saucer gadget behind me is the first, whoa, watch out, Clown, is the first bathtub that we had. It sits on the ground, and this little leg here is where you actually sit on this little platform. You put your feet in the base, your soap is here, and you can wash in a couple of gallons of water. And that was very important for us early on because the only source of water we had was the spring across the road. And so we would bring it over here by the bucketful. And we did not want to bring over more buckets than we absolutely had to. So this way of cleansing ourselves while using a small amount of water was actually very important to us. There are museums like Mercer Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, that specialize in tools. You can go there and see the tools used for making pottery and furniture, textile tools, an amazing and endless variety of tools. On the other hand, you can go to a regular museum like the Philadelphia Museum of Art or Winterthur Museum and see the results of the tools. You can see the beautiful furniture, you can see the textiles, you can see the pots, you can see the ornate wrought iron. One of the interesting things here is that we have both. We have the tools that made the items, and we have the objects themselves. In this room, which we call the Weary Woodworking Shop, we have the woodworking bench and the tools, the planes, the chisels that were used to make furniture by a father and son team, Rufus and Josiah Weary. We were fortunate in knowing 2 of their descendants, Lawrence and Faye Kopp, brother and sister, who not only had the woodworking shop, but the furniture that was made with these tools. These are examples of the furniture that the Wearys made. We have a butler's desk, a bureau, there are also rope beds and chests, and a slat bed. The slat bed is particularly interesting. This was made for Josiah's wife. She snored, according to Faye, so badly and so loudly that Josiah did not want her in his bedroom. So he kicked her out. He put her in another room in the house, and he built this little bed, and this is where she stayed. It's family stories like that that really make knowing these people so special. The Wearies were not the only talented people in that family. Their descendants, Lawrence and Fay, and their mother, Minnie, were very craft-oriented. Minnie made these little Moravian-style stars. They knitted booties. They even covered their clothes hangers with this textile. Zephyr, what would you call this? Is there a name for this type of textile work? Crochet. She even crocheted covers. Fay crocheted covers for their clothes hangers. Lawrence, when he was a young boy in the 30s, carved these two airplanes, and he also made a stand here with a bird's nest. He was already starting to get interested in nature. These are the types of things that we find fascinating when we meet people. Other people we have met wore these bonnets. In Pennsylvania Dutch they're called schlaphalbes. We knew the women who not only made these, but who wore them as well. Most of them are simple and just simply cover the head, as in this one that was made by Minnie Kopp. However, for outdoor work, the older women would make schlaphalbes that had a shoulder cover. And we remember seeing Sue Lenore walking like a ghost out of the past by her stone house with her schlaphalbe covering her shoulders. These sitz bonnets, as well as a row of aprons that we have, were from a dear woman we knew, June Mosser. She was always sewing, always cutting up quilt sections, and always keeping busy. And after she passed away, we were able to go to her sale and collect many of the things that she made. So we have a June Mosser collection of bonnets as well as a Mosser collection of aprons. The Kopp family and the Wearies before them took photographs, which is not commonly done here in the valley. At one point, Fay gave us their generations of photographs. We made copies of them, put them on the wall. We have several photograph collections here. And this is one of the most interesting. It has not only family photographs, but also farming photographs from other places around the valley. It shows the general store. It shows the local choir. It has a number of photographs dating from about 1900 into the 1950s that really capture what it was like to live here in the Mahantongo Valley. After living in this valley for nearly 30 years, we've known many wonderful people. And this millstone is connected with the story of one of the people we met when we first moved here. Her name was Marie Heim. And she was one of the old-fashioned Dutch women in the valley. The last time I saw her, more than 15 years ago, she and her daughter were butchering chickens. The daughter would cut off their heads and string them up on the clothesline to bleed out, and Marie would pluck them and prepare them for freezing. I would go and visit Marie, and she talked about the past. She talked about people she remembered. And one day, when I brought her some ginger snap cookies, she loved cookies. She thought for a second and said, I really would like to give you something. She pondered and pondered. Would you like a millstone? Well, yes. So I rushed home And Zephram and I drove back in the van. We used ramps to push the millstone into the back of the van. Of course, the back of the van immediately went down and barely made it back. But this is that millstone, and it's Marie's millstone. There are about 17 display areas in the barn on 2 different levels. Many of the areas are actually period rooms, and this is an example of what we have. They would have beds, chests, bureaus, chairs, and tables. It's amazing to realize how creative these furniture makers were in our valley at making a chair. How many different ways can you make a chair? How many different ways can you make a bed? And it seems to be almost an endless variety, almost as a fashion designer turning out endless varieties of clothing. Again, many of the people who owned these pieces were friends of ours. This particular piece, which you were looking at from the back, but this bureau was actually in a farmhouse about half a mile east of us, and it was owned by Leroy Cluck, and I remember seeing it in his room when he was still living. He had his collection of baseball caps on here, and he had about 30 caps just on top of the bureau. He put them up for free. They were often advertising caps or for different teams, and that was what he used. He could probably have a different cap for every day of the month. This type of 4-poster bed was the Pennsylvania, Germany equivalent of the English high 4-poster or tester bed that would have bed hangings on at least 3 of the sides to keep out drafts. But I think it may be due to the fact that the Germans slept very warmly under their feather mattresses, which the English did not use, that kept them from using tester beds. However, they had these sort of imitation tester beds, and on some of the beds, you would see the blanket bar, where they were just, or coverlet bar, where they would just simply put the blanket or coverlet over this when they weren't using it. Some of these beds are also trundle beds, meaning that they are high enough off the ground that you can put a smaller bed under it and just simply roll it out and put it back in if you're going to be using it at night. This is an example of a hired hands bed or a youth bed. It was certainly not made by a professional furniture maker. It was cobbled together by a farmer probably, and it was never designed to be shown off. It's simply a basic bed for sleeping. Carved, sawn, not carved, but sawn out of planks. It's a rope bed. There are knobs here for putting the ropes on. And it was simply a basic utilitarian bed. So this was the bottom line for beds in our valley. The basic type of bed that I imagine far more people slept in than we tend to realize these days, surrounded as we are by finer examples of the furniture maker's art. I have a feeling that most people slept in very simple beds like this. When we moved to this farm to create the Hermitage in November of 1988, we lived here, we made a room, and we lived in the barn for the first year and a half. After that, we found an abandoned log cabin down the valley that we took apart, brought up here, and rebuilt. For heat, we used this stove. We found it down in Berks County. It's what's known as a 10-plate stove because it consists of 10 iron plates. This particular stove was from the Lehigh Valley. It's a Matthew Henry stove, actually from north of Nazareth, which is very close to our Moravian settlement that we were recreating ourselves. The amazing thing about these stoves is that in solid metal form, They have a beautiful fluidity about them. The castings are often elaborately carved. And to me, it's amazing that you can actually take liquid metal and shape it into a variety of beautiful forms. The problem is that when you find these stoves, they're often in dreadful condition. Sometimes they're overheated, the plates may be warped, they may be missing plates, hinges may be broken. They take a lot of work to bring them back. Typically they're rusted and you have to scrape off the rust, you have to paint them with stove paint. And so we had to work at this one to get it back. But this one heated very well our 18 by 18 foot cabin that we lived in. It's a wood burning stove. You place the wood in the bottom and the heat goes towards the back, up a baffle, across the front, and then out the stovepipe and the chimney. It's a fascinating way of both cooking and heating. Not only does it provide heat, but there is a baking section in here. You just simply open the door, put your baked goods in there and shut it, and they'll cook. And you can use the top for pan frying, for boiling, things like that. So it's a marvelous invention. Again, it's one that takes work when you find one to make it usable again. But they are works of art. And it's a type of stove that was invented as a transitional piece from the open fireplace to the coal-fire stoves that so many people remember from the late 19th century. These go from about 1810 up to the 1850s. A friend of ours who we've known for many, many years is a junk dealer and deals in industrial machinery, obsolete industrial machinery. One day, he had a question for me. He asked me what this was. And I had no idea what this incredibly heavy piece of iron is. Turns out it's a well driller. And it works by having a scaffolding and raising this iron rod high in the air and just letting it drop into the ground. And it actually will, there's a flange on it that would capture the dirt and soil and pull it up. You actually would lift it up, release the captured dirt to one side, raise it, and then keep lowering it, smashing it into the ground, raising it, smashing it, raising it, until you finally get down deep enough to find water. It doesn't have any relationship to the valley here, but it's a marvelous artifact. Transitions are a very important part of our work here at the Hermitage and also in the objects we have in the museum. Transitions from hand sewing, for example, to early sewing machines. Transitions from playing musical instruments like a piano or a Zeisholtz or dulcimer to early hand-cranked Vitrolas and Columbia Graffanolas. These types of transitions from hand spinning and hand weaving to factory-made clothing were transitions that people had to live through. And if you were put out of work as a seamstress or as a hand weaver, there were issues, economic issues that you had to deal with in order to find a new job. So these transitions are something that tell a basic part of the story in our valley. Two rooms here in the museum deal not with local history but with textiles. We have a Maine weaving room and a Pennsylvania weaving room. This is an 18th century loom that we found on a porch in Maine. Zephram's people come from Maine, and we found this on a porch, and the owner thought it was probably pretty much all here. Fortunately, he was right, and so we put it up, And we have this loom, and we have a prison loom, a two-harness rud loom from the Lehigh County Prison in Allentown, which is where the prisoners would actually work to earn their keep. In addition to the looms, we have a variety of spinning and textile equipment, especially flats equipment. One of the most interesting things we have that are not even from this country are these flats combs. We have several examples of flats combs with wooden nails. Now, the typical flats comb has iron nails on it, like this one, and you pull the broken flat straw through these combs and separate the chaff from the spinnable fiber. We had always seen them with metal nails. However, we were demonstrating at an historic site once, and a person came up and said they had a Lithuanian flats comb with wooden nails, which they gave to us. This is not that one. We have others since then. But they have wooden nails. They don't work very well. But the story they tell is of a place that was iron poor and simply didn't have enough iron ore to use for nails, and so they used what they had, which was a lot of wood. This loom is the Lehigh County Prison loom. It was in a barn, and the man who owned it didn't want it, and sold it to us. We put it together. At some point, one of the prisoners carved the word Marta, M-A-R-T-A, on it, and so we call it Marta as her name. It's a two-harness rud loom. Rud looms provided a variety of floor coverings. They typically used rads, cut-up rads, as the basis for the rug. You see here, in this one that's coming apart, how they would actually braid rads together, and then they would insert them between the warp of the loom to make a length of carpet. Another textile craft that still exists in our valley is quilting. Many of the women we've known have been quilters. The sewing of quilts and the making of quilt patches and putting them together is still an ongoing craft here. In fact, one of the local churches every Wednesday has a quilters quilting bee where the women get together and make quilts to send to overseas missions. We've known the women who have quilted these, and that gives it a special, I hate to use the word nostalgia, but a special relationship that we have with these quilts because we knew the women who made them. Zephram bought this wedding dress at a sale a few years ago, and the granddaughter of the woman who had worn this dress at her wedding came to us and said she had a photograph of her grandmother wearing this dress as her wedding portrait. And she invited us to come by one time and we could take a picture of this dress with her grandmother wearing it. Well, I passed her house for years and years and years, never dropped in. Finally, it must have been 10 years went by. I dropped in. She gave us, she showed us the picture. I took a photograph of it. We came back and compared the two. It wasn't the dress. It actually was not her wedding dress. She had another dress on. So that's just another example for us of how to be very suspicious of oral history. We never did tell her that this was not her grandmother's wedding dress. But we have a beautiful dress, a very period dress, and we have another nice photograph of her grandmother just wearing something different. So these are the tribulations one can get into with oral history. This is the last room in the museum. It's the 20th century room, and it shows what happened to the early furniture makers here in the valley. It shows what happened to the self-sufficiency of the people who lived here. We have examples of the last gasp of local handmade furniture. Instead of doing the original hand-painted decoration, they started putting on decals. Or if they did paint with decoration, it certainly was not the artistic quality of the pieces that were made 100 years earlier. As furniture became more centralized into factories outside our area, there were still people who would cobble together and make a piece of furniture when they needed it. For example, this cupboard was from, what is this, huh? Here, come on, honey. All right. This cupboard was at the nearby Mauer farm, and Zephram found it. The house had fallen in. This was in the cellar, and I guess the house had sort of fallen in around this piece, and he came over and said, we have to get this cupboard. So we went over there and lifted it up and trudged it down the hollow and up over to here. It's a piece made probably by the farmer himself because he needed a cupboard and has no artistic quality whatsoever, but it was something that was made locally and was still in the tradition of being self-reliant. What put all of this out of business, though, were pieces like this, factory-made pieces that came from, Wisconsin, that came from maybe from the South. They were brought in. We had railroads near here by that time. There were certainly cheaper ways of transportation that did not exist when the valley was first settled. So it's this furniture. It was either dark furniture like this or golden oak. It was very much of the day, of the mode. It was fashionable, and local people had more money. They were simply not interested in having the local handmade furniture. It wasn't up to date enough for them. It wasn't fancy for them. It was too old-fashioned. So that put the local furniture makers out of business and also relegated most of the handmade furniture in the valley to the second floor, out of the public spaces and into the attics and cellars, where we found a lot of it. As a period of transition in the early 20th century, people went from storing food in their spring houses to using an ice chest to using these monitor top refrigerators that came in style in the 20s once there was some electricity. Even in our valley, the earliest forms of electricity were either turbo power from the creek, or they simply made their own. We've even seen wind power, early examples of wind power, where people made their own energy before they were even connected up to the earliest forms of the power grid. And by this time, in the 1920s, people were getting standardized in their taste. They were reading magazines, Life magazine, Look magazine, Collier's. They were learning what people were wearing, what people were using, how people were living in other parts of the country. They wanted beds that were made out of brass and iron instead of the handmade beds that they might keep up out of the way in the attic or the second floor. So this is the end of an era. And from this point, we actually go back to the beginning of the museum, because after this, the folk tradition and the folk heritage became objects of academic interest and weekend curiosity, as opposed to a living, vibrant tradition of beauty and utility. We hope this has encouraged you to want to see the Mahantongo Heritage Center at the Hermitage. At the very end, we'll give you information with our mailing address and how to contact us. We are open from May through October by appointment. Visits and tours are free, though we do accept donations. And in addition to seeing the Heritage Center here in the barn, there are certain buildings, public buildings here at the Hermitage that are open, like our 1759 Domina House and the Spinning and Weaving Studio, the print shop, and other buildings that you may find of interest. So we invite you to go to our website, see other photographs of the Hermitage here, learn about what we're doing with our spirituality, and we invite you to come visit us, and there will be information at the end about how to do just that. So from Zephram and myself, we want to thank you for being with us on this tour of the Mahantongo Heritage Center. Thank you.